Everyone, it's Eugene Lee Show, and welcome to episode 41 of Forensics Talks. I want to welcome everybody here. Hope you're having a good day. Don't forget that this is on YouTube, so if you have any questions or comments, you can just drop them into the chat window. Also, I always like to know where people are from. We often get people from all over the place and around the world, so please go ahead and put those in the comments. I only have just really one announcement, and that is the IABPA conference, which is coming up September 27th to October 1st. So that'll be the following week. And if you're interested in bloodstain pattern analysis, then that's going to be the conference for you to attend. It is in person in Greeley, Colorado, but it's also virtual. So there is an option for that as well. I'm going to be hosting a workshop on Thursday, September 30th. At 10 a.m. Eastern, and we're going to be working through some software and looking at some different types of analysis that can be done with bloodstain patterns. All right, so we're going to get right into it. And my guest today is François Xavier Laurent, and he has a background in biology and genetics. From 2004 to 2006, he was a research assistant at the French National Center for Scientific Research and also the French National Institute of Health and Medical Research. François received his PhD in molecular genetics from the Université Paris-Saclay in 2011, and in 2013, he also did some postdoctoral research at the University of Massachusetts Medical School. From 2013 to 2020, he's been the head of research and development in forensic genetics at the French Forensic Police Institute. He's also a lecturer at the University of Lyon and is a freelance consultant. But he's here today because since 2020, he is the DNA database manager at Interpol. So let me bring him in here. Hey there, François. How are you doing today?
Hello, Eugene. How are you?
Good. Hey, thanks so much for being here. We finally got our alignment of the schedules, so that's great.
Exactly. I'm glad.
I want to ask you a little about your background first before we sort of get into some of the work that you're doing at Interpol. And you obviously have a heavy biology and chemistry background. Is that something that you've always been interested in from the very beginning, or did you kind of fall into it?
Well, I would say that the first thing I was very interested about when I was younger was, investigations, police, crime scene, missing persons. So I was reading a lot of books. I was watching a lot of movies. Also, my dad is a policeman and my granddad as well. So I heard many, stories about investigations and stuff. So I was always interested by that. But the most interesting part of it, all this was what was the science behind it. So I've always been fascinated with understanding how science could help criminal investigations, and why was the blood like drying, and why could you find some fingerprints when you were touching objects, and what was DNA and things. So all this like scientific background, that's what I've basically learned at school, then at university, and then I kind of started forgetting about all this like crime scene investigations fascination I had, and starting to be in a very like normal academic experience and background, starting to have working for a PhD, then doing a postdoc. So following the kind of normal path that any scientist is kind of doing. And then it kind of went back to me at some point, thinking, you probably forgot about, all of this. And I must say that, working in science in the academic background, it's a bit frustrating because you need to wait many years or 10 years or so to see that one day what you found in your research is useful for the community and for the general people in the world. And so it kind of came back to me saying, well, can you maybe use your scientific background to help the police and go back to what you liked before? And that's when there was some positions open back in France, and I applied and got the position. So it's very simple in the end.
Oh, awesome. I wanted to ask you about Interpol because, you're working for this, people, I think, have heard Interpol probably more in the movies than anything, because on a day-to-day basis, we hear about our local police, or, we hear about some of the larger agencies that are national to a particular country. But what can you tell me about Interpol and the way that they're kind of like structured and how they're set up, and what's their mandate?
Sure. So Interpol's role is to enable police around the world to work together to fight international crimes, basically. So, you have some criminals that will operate across borders, and the borders now can be physical, but also virtual. And so they take the advantage of the world, which is interconnected now, and new opportunities to make a profit with no regards for their victims. So you have cyber criminals that will target individuals and infrastructures. You have traffickers that will trade in drug, illicit goods in many countries. You have people that will be exploiting vulnerable people, such as children and migrants. So, altogether, it's very alarming that so many people are trying to, do the wrong things, basically. And so most of the time, what we understand from the police officers is that organized crime networks, they use the income from one criminal activity to support another one. And so what you see as isolated crimes, such as, credit card fraud, counterfeiting, car theft, for example, can be part of a much bigger network and can ultimately maybe be funding terrorism. So, all these criminal activities, they shatter the lives of victims, damage businesses, environment, and are a general threat to the security of people in the world. So to do that, basically Interpol is an international organization with 194 member countries who each got an Interpol National Central Bureau, that's what we call an NCB, that will be able to connect together the national police and Interpol. And this way, all the police in the world can exchange police information through a secure network. And so the headquarters of Interpol are based in Lyon, in France. That's where I'm talking from today. So that's what we call the General Secretariat. And it provides technical, operational support to all the member countries and training. And it operates 24 hours a day, 360 days a year. So it's basically a very big network of police forces trying to work each other and help themselves.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of interesting because obviously in this day and age with the internet and everything else, like communication, you would think is not that big of a deal. But I wonder if there's still some challenges with having, so many countries in the world, so much activity all over the place. Do police agencies around the world sort of have key people that are working with you, or is there some kind of a connection or a bridge so that there's good communication there?
Yes. So basically the way it's handled is you have the headquarters of Interpol that contains all the services. So we may be talking about it a bit later, but all the databases, all the criminal information that are shared by countries. And we are talking directly with another country going through their National Central Bureau. So the National Central Bureau in each country is the link between the country and Interpol. And therefore, if, for example, there is a murder in France, the police in France may decide that if they've tried everything nationally and they haven't been able to identify, the suspect, maybe they will contact through Interpol the police in Italy or Germany or Spain to see if they have information about the suspect of the wanted person. And so that's the other thing as well, is that if somebody commits a crime in a country, they may be committing other crimes in other country. And so by sharing this information, trying to identify the suspect is helping not one country, but many, many more countries, and therefore all the victims of the crimes that the person committed.
Right. Now, is Interpol, are they more focused with dealing with other police agencies, or do they deal with people directly? Like, could somebody contact Interpol and say, hey, I've got an issue or something like this?
So that's more in the movies. I would say that you can take your phone and call Interpol to say, oh, my neighbor is not nice or something like that. So of course, it doesn't really work like that. So
Okay.
The way it works, only the police forces can contact us through the National Central Bureaus, but we also work quite a lot with some NGOs or international entities. Because, for example, for missing persons, we have entities that can help us outside of the police world, I would say. So if you see, we can be, talking with the Red Cross, for example, or the ICMP, the International Commission for Missing Persons. So we at Interpol have a police work, of course, but we also have a humanitarian work that we do in order to help the victims and, for example, identify missing persons. That's what I'm mostly doing at the moment.
Right. Yeah. Well, let's get into it, because obviously you have an extensive background working with like DNA and all kinds of different things, working in the healthcare system or for medical and that sort of thing. So a couple of weeks ago, I did an interview with Colleen Fitzpatrick, and so it was my first sort of introduction to familial DNA. So this is quite timely, and so I feel like I'm a little bit educated now. Like I could speak a little bit better, not a lot, because it's not my area. But we're going to be talking about the I-FAMILIA database, I guess, is really what it is. But prior to this, and prior we got into this, what capabilities did Interpol have in terms of DNA and that sort of thing? Sort of what prior to the I-FAMILIA, like what kinds of things did you work on? Did you work with partners on this, or do you have all the resources yourself?
So basically, I must say that DNA has been used for criminal investigations. I think probably for the past 20 years now. So it's pretty recent, and many countries starting to build their own national capabilities to use DNA to be able to get the DNA from the crime scene to maybe identify a suspect and close the investigation. So of course DNA can be used for many things on the criminal side, but it can be also useful for missing persons. So if you have, for example, a person gone missing, you can maybe get the DNA from a toothbrush or a personal object. And if, unfortunately, one day you find a body, you can get the DNA from the body and compare the two profiles to see if they are, the same. So that's basically what's happening in many countries in the world. But one question was, what is happening if a person is gone missing in France and the body is discovered at the other side of the world? Mm-hmm. And how do you put the police together? So that's how the DNA database was created at Interpol at first. And so that was in 2004, so at the beginning of how DNA was used for criminal purposes. And since that, there were more than 1,000 of hits between countries, helping them to compare the DNA between all the 194 member countries. So it started like that. But that's what we basically call a direct DNA match, which means that you have a DNA profile of a person, you have the DNA profile of the same person but somewhere else, and you're trying to compare them, and they need to be completely identical, because basically all the cells in your body have the same DNA profile. So if you lose blood on the crime scene, then it's going to be the same DNA profile that you have from a swab that can be used to get the DNA from a suspect. Mm-hmm. But for missing persons, there's a big question, is that a lot of the time you don't have access to the DNA profile of the missing person itself, because you don't have any personal belongings that you can use for that, because the person is coming from a country where there is she has no property or anything like that. So a lot of the time you have cases where you're declaring a person gone missing, but you don't have any DNA profiles to compare the potential bodies that you can find with. Mm-hmm. And so it's very troubling, and that was something missing, and that's why we hope that I-FAMILIA will help with in the future.
Right. Well, let's talk about I-FAMILIA, because I was really surprised by the strength of using familial DNA, or I guess you call it, is it Y-DNA or YSTR or something like this? And simply because really, like you just said, you don't always have the person's DNA sitting there. And in the case of, well, obviously crime is important for what you do, but I think you raise a really great point, missing persons, right? So humanitarian purposes, this can be a very, very powerful tool. So I was really impressed at how, in a small population, if you have a small database, you can really branch out and really connect people together, just through their families, their heritage. And so, it seems like very powerful. So what was what was the idea, or how did the idea get started for I-FAMILIA?
So basically the idea was that when you're looking at the stats in the world, it seems that around 100,000 people are gone missing in the world altogether. So it's a very huge number. And what we think is that that's only the tip of the iceberg, that there are probably a lot more people who have not been declared missing. There's a lot of migration as well in the world. And so a lot of people are losing their life within the Mediterranean Sea, for example, in Europe. So there are probably a very big part of the people gone missing, which we have no idea, basically. And so for all these populations and very old cases as well, like old investigations, we don't have the DNA profile of the missing person. So as you said, family members, relatives of a criminal can be used sometimes in must be very specific laws and stuff, but it can be used to identify the person that can be related with 1, 2, or 3 generations. For missing person, it's different, because most of the time the family are actively looking for information about their loved ones. They are, surrounded by grief and sorrow. They have no idea where their loved ones have gone. Sometimes it can be extremely difficult, because as long as if you don't have a death certificate, then economically it can be extremely difficult for the families. So there is a real importance that Interpol, as well as other organizations, can help these families trying to identify the loved ones. So when we don't have the DNA of the missing person, we can use the DNA from the family members. So it can be the parents, the children, the siblings, maybe cousins, grandparents, if we don't have access to like really close family members. And the idea is that DNA is shared basically. So you have DNA and 50% is coming from your mom, 50% is coming from your dad. And so based on statistical evaluation, you can determine if the DNA profile of a body found somewhere can fit within a family tree. And so this is pretty complicated because it's not what we call a direct match. It's not identical. It means that sometimes you can share your DNA, but you don't necessarily share everything about your DNA. So there is a high risk of adventitious matches, and you need to have a lot of experience into determining if a potential match in a database with family members and a missing person is true or not. And that's the big difficulty. How do you treat the results, and how do you determine if a match is a good one or not?
Right, for sure. And in terms of the database, like in my conversation a couple of weeks ago, they were using some of these open source, available databases which are online. I forget, is it GEDmatch? I can't remember if it was called GEDmatch. GEDmatch. Okay. So in your case, though, are you just depending on the family to donate this, or do you have access to other databases around the world?
So we don't have access to any database because there is no international database. I mean, I-FAMILIA is the first one that will be hosting the DNA profile from the relatives of missing person. So I think the main reason is that it's very sensitive data, because you could argue that when you have a DNA database and you put people who are suspected or convicted of a crime, then there is, let's say, a reason why the DNA of these people are in the database. And so the problem with the relatives of family members of missing person is that these person haven't committed any crime. And so their DNA data shouldn't be compared with any criminal things, because that's not the purpose of why the DNA is in the database. The purpose is trying to identify the loved ones. So that's why Interpol created I-FAMILIA, which is a non-nominal database, which means that we don't get any information about the names of the family members because we don't need to have it. And it's a database which is restricted to the DNA of family members and the DNA of unidentified human remains profile that we get from the police around the world. So it means that the only purpose of I-FAMILIA is really humanitarian. It's really to find links between family members and bodies or people that can't identify themselves. So it's a very different way of doing it. When you use genealogy for criminal purposes, then you're looking for, in the database, relatives of a criminal that have also been convicted of a criminal crime, basically. The missing person, it's a different way. It's the families trying to actively look for their loved ones and give their DNA on purpose to help the investigations. And so by connecting I-FAMILIA with all the countries around the world and their information on investigations and DNA profile from relatives, then we can make the link between countries.
Okay, yeah, that's a very different approach then, because obviously looking for the criminal, you just throw it into this huge database and you're trying to look for a match. But in your case, you're really looking at a very sort of small, maybe one or two samples from relatives or something like this, and then trying to and then trying to see from there.
Completely.
Okay, that's a very important distinction for sure. So in the case, I mean, obviously right now, since you've launched this, how does the process work basically? Like, because I mean, it's obviously new, so you've got to get the word out there to different, whatever, like especially now Afghanistan and different other places. So how do you let people know that this is available to them?
So a big part of it is a communication to all our 194 member countries to tell them that a new capability of Interpol is coming. And so, we already have quite a lot of databases. I think altogether we have 19 databases at Interpol, but we only have 2 related to DNA. And so basically, we are trying to make them understand that when you've tried everything nationally, you should be seeking for the help of international organizations such as Interpol, because the person that you're looking for may be abroad. And so when it's abroad, you imagine being yourself a police officer, thinking that maybe the person I'm looking for went to another country. Who am I contacting? who do I know who is in charge of the case of the potential body that could be linking, with the case of the missing person. So Interpol really has the capacity to put people in contact very quickly and help them to carry on with the case. But most importantly, we have the database. And so country A can give the information about the DNA from the missing person in the conventional DNA database or the DNA from family members in I-FAMILIA. And country B will be giving us some DNA profiles from unidentified bodies. And Interpol will use the databases to make the link between country A and country B. And so in this way, what we do is checking the results, seeing if the genetic evidence is strong enough for us to report a potential match. We will then maybe look at the antemortem and postmortem information. So we're always trying to see if the date of disappearance of a person is before the discovery of a body. Otherwise, there's no chance that it could be the same person. And when we have that, when we have this evidence which is confirmed, then we can alert the country and we send them a report, match report basically to country A and B, saying, okay, we've found a connection. Now it's your job to decide if you want to follow up on that and if you want to try to confirm the identity that we're proposing to you. And so that's the best way to do it, because police officers, they're so busy. They have many investigations at the same time. They don't have the time to just work as well on what's going abroad. So that's the role of Interpol, to bridge the gap between police forces and to alert them on interesting potential match that could be helping both countries at the same time.
Right. Yeah. And actually, I was just thinking about this, but like here in North America, obviously Mexico, the United States, and Canada are extremely large, right? We have 3 countries, and we cover an enormous amount of landmass. Whereas in Europe, with all the international crime must be rampant there, because you just have to drive an hour this way and you're in another country, right? So
completely.
So is Interpol more active then in certain places of the world than like North America, maybe?
So it depends. Basically, the main countries we're working with are countries which were at the beginning of the use of DNA, for example, in criminal science. So Europe, of course, is a very great partner. Canada, the US as well are very well equipped and collaborate quite a lot with us. I must say that when you have some terrorist attacks as well, it's bringing countries together, because they have a common goal and they're trying to identify the persons, and their international help is really advised. And so unfortunately, there are some parts of the world where the national countries are not completely equipped with DNA capabilities. And so, if you don't have the capabilities nationally, then you can't really collaborate internationally. So that's why Interpol has also this side of training the countries, training individuals, training police officers to help them build their national capabilities. Therefore, they could be, in the future, able to help us and send us data, criminal data, which can be compared with other countries, and so on and so on. So we are trying to work really efficiently with countries that are, completely operational, but we're also trying to help the countries to get some new capabilities, provide them services, provide them databases that they can, consult, in order to, help the international cooperation within police forces around the world.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, you had mentioned about people going missing in the Mediterranean, and there was this case here. I don't know if you can talk about this, but was this one of the first cases that you worked on in I-FAMILIA? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So that was a very, very interesting case because of I would say the simplicity of the case. So of course it took quite a long to build I-FAMILIA, to make the full development validation of the software, determining how do you statistically determine if a match is a good match or not a good match, to set thresholds to determine when you report or not. So there's a lot of work behind it, but this shows exactly what is the purpose of I-FAMILIA. So in this case, for example, we had at Interpol, at the conventional DNA database, the DNA profile from a dead body that was found in the Adriatic Sea. So let's say, between Italy and Croatia.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the time, it was in 2004, and the Croatian police discovered this body. So the body was in the water in a very bad shape. Basically, there was only parts of the body available. There were a couple of personal belongings, but nothing very interesting to determine the identity of the person. And so the only thing that was possible to get was DNA, because you didn't have any fingers anymore, so you couldn't use fingerprints. The face was missing, so you couldn't use any photography. And so the only intelligence that you could really use was DNA. So that's what the Croatian police did. They get some biological samples from the body, got the DNA profiles, and then put it in their national database, and it didn't match to anything. And so it was there in the national database for 16 years, and in the Interpol DNA database, because it was not matching to the national, the Croatia bureau decided to send it to Interpol as well, and to keep it as long as it was matching to something else. And a bit before the launch of I-FAMILIA, we got starting to get some interest from countries and some requests. And we got the DNA profile from 2 children of a missing person from Italy. And so, interestingly, this missing person was reported missing in 2004. So basically the same year as when the body was discovered. Mm-hmm. So we started thinking, that's interesting. And so everything was put in I-FAMILIA, and we instantly found a match between the 2 DNA profiles from the children of the missing person in Italy and the DNA from the body in Croatia. So we looked at the results. Statistical evaluation was extremely good. We looked at the dates, and the dates was 1 month separation between the disappearance and the discovery of the body. The information we got on the clothing as well was of Italian brand. That's just, anybody could wear Italian brand, but there was an additional evidence that it could be interesting. So based on that, we contacted both police in Croatia and Italy, saying, we found a potential match between data from your both country. Can you just look at it, maybe confirm it using your national procedures, and determine if it's the real person that has been missing for 16 years. Mm-hmm. And we got a couple of weeks later the confirmation from both countries that it was indeed the same person. So you're thinking, the person gone missing for 16 years, and there was just 100 kilometers between the body and where the person was last seen. So you're thinking, if there was a possibility before to put the countries together to compare this like complex DNA data and find link, it would have solved maybe, I don't know, hundreds, thousands of missing person cases. So we feel that with I-FAMILIA, we really have the missing link between missing person investigations and bodies found as well. But that's interesting because you talked about Afghanistan, and that's really something that I wanted to talk about as well, is that, please. We have a lot of people that got into exile from Afghanistan to be safer in another country. So I know some people left to the US, some people left to France, to Norway and other countries. And unfortunately, some families have been separated during the exile. And so some countries have, welcomed some children, but without their parents. And we are thinking maybe their parents went into another plane in another direction. And so the idea is, how do we bring back these family members together without having any communication between countries? It's very tough. I mean, there's not a common word list of all the people trying to find their loved ones. So Interpol has proposed that we could use I-FAMILIA not to identify dead bodies, but to identify people that can't identify themselves, such as children. And so the idea is to use I-FAMILIA, and countries can submit the DNA profiles of family members, or, for example, the parents of a child that has disappeared since the exile from Afghanistan. And maybe another country will say, we have these children, we don't know who his parent is, and so we can get the DNA from the child and put it in I-FAMILIA. And so I-FAMILIA will be able to bridge the gap between the parents' DNA and the children's DNA, and hopefully reunite them together.
Yeah. Okay. So actually, bridge it directly, so very, very close ties between the mother and father. So
exactly.
Right. But also, if you have many generations, if it's an extended aunt or a great grandparent or something like this could potentially help as well.
Exactly. And the thing is, when you're working with missing person cases globally, it's difficult because you don't know where the person is. Yeah. It could be a match with a few thousand kilometers of separation. But when you're working on very specific cases, such as the exile from Afghanistan, then it's pretty simple, because you're only comparing the data within this event. And so even if you have a cousin, a sibling, a very, as you say, like third degree cousin or something like
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
then you can still make some assumptions. And then, DNA is only one part of the evidence, because when you have this potential link identified, then you can use many other things. You can get the information about the person. You can compare the photos. Maybe there is some personal belongings that can be used to confirm the identity. So it's not really a criminal way. When you're trying to identify a criminal, you can't use just one piece of evidence. You need to grab everything you can, because it's in favor or not of the person being the perpetrator. For missing person, it's different, because technically there's only one body corresponding to one missing person. So you need to use all the elements you have to confirm that, and to bring peace in the end to the families.
Yeah, I imagine that now that the system is launched or whatever, you must have had some historical cases or older cases that you're trying to run through this thing now, or maybe you must have some kind of a backlog, no?
Yeah, so we have quite a lot of demand, I must say. So we're really happy. That's what we were looking for. But we started to face some difficulties in terms of the quality of DNA profiles that we got, and that's a thing that needs to be understood. Is that when we started to use DNA, or, I mean but I was probably 10 years old when it all started. But
Yeah.
when DNA was first used in criminal investigations, the number of markers, the location that you were looking in the DNA was very small, because technical solutions were not really available. So you could only compare 6, 7 parts of the DNA together. And so with the technology getting better and better and better, now we're looking at 24 markers, or sometimes even more. If we're talking about massively parallel sequencing, we can look at thousands regions of the DNA in criminal investigations. And so the more data you have, the better it is to compare if both data are compatible or not. And what we're facing is that we have so many cold cases, I mean, investigations that started maybe 50, 40, 30 years ago, with the DNA quality of 50 years
Yeah.
ago, and the technologies of 20 years ago. So there's a whole aspect of things that the DNA, which has been stored by laboratories, need to maybe be analyzed by the new technologies, which are available in 2021. So you can have more intelligence on the DNA profiles, and then you can have more data to compare it with new data that you could get from another country. So it's perpetuating that we need to increase the quality of the DNA profiles that we get in the world. And some police may be working with old generation kits as well, and some countries may not be using exactly the same marker. So we can only compare what is overlapping between the two requests. So sometimes it's difficult, because we only have a tiny information that we can compare, and so we need to reach out to countries to ask them for more information to confirm that.
Yeah. Can you say anything about the team or the technologies that you have, or the equipment or hardware and that sort of thing that you use there?
Sure. So at Interpol, we don't have any DNA lab, because our purpose is not to analyze the biological samples. That's the role of each country to have their own forensic institute or forensic laboratory. And so we only receive the DNA profile, which is basically a list of numbers, like a barcode that you would say, and we can compare this data. But what we have at Interpol is our databases, like really efficient databases that can compare data together in a fraction of a second. And so for DNA, for example, for I-FAMILIA, we use Bonaparte, which is a software which has been developed by the National Forensic Institute in collaboration with Smart Research, which is just a small company in the Netherlands. And it's a very state-of-the-art software that will allow you to make some calculations within seconds. But we also, for example, compare nominal data. We compare like documentation that has been stolen, for example. So if one day your passport is being stolen, you can report it to your police. The police will say to Interpol, this passport has been stolen. So if one day somebody uses your passport and goes through the borders, they can see on the Interpol files and in databases that this passport is fraudulent, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So all this software are really useful to compare data, but we need to do it on very large amount of data on large amount of different people that are using the database at the same time, and especially give an answer very quickly. Because if you need 10 minutes each time for a border officer to check the documents, there's going to be a big backlog at the airport. So it needs to be extremely efficient in terms of capacity and in terms of response time.
I see. So is part of your job to like, are you doing training, education, getting out there and speaking to people and letting these other police agencies know, hey, you need to start thinking about this in your daily work?
Yes, that's exactly that. So I think half of my time is really a scientific job, which is developing methods, trying to find ways to make the analysis a bit quicker, trying to find ways to help the police officers and find efficient ways to give them access to new capabilities, new technologies. And the other part of the job is to actually go abroad, discuss with the police forces from around the world and tell them, Interpol has a large set of capabilities that we can provide to you. And in case you've tried everything nationally, think about the international. And as you say, Europe, it's a big continent, but we are made of smaller countries. And so in Europe, there is basically no borders inside of Europe, so people can freely travel. And so this instantly create more international crime. And so if the police are not starting to work more efficiently with each other, sharing data, then nothing's going to really change. So, and you also have these cases where, for example, a French person will travel to Thailand to surf somewhere, and they gone missing, and Thailand finds a body. They have no idea who it can belong to. So, if there's no connection between the two countries, the case will never be solved. So, we're really trying to encourage countries by training them, by offering them capabilities to really think about this international element. And because crime is more international than ever, we need to fight this, together. And there's, this whole part of what we call physical crime, like, a suspect going to another country to commit a crime, of course, but all these cyber crime criminals as well. And cyber crime is so important as well. And there's no physical border to control that. So police need to work together, and more than just the scale of the national country. It needs to be wider, of course.
Right. And I imagine that people want to participate. I mean, people they're excited, probably somewhat excited about this news, especially, connecting people, connecting families. That's a very good thing to be doing, obviously.
Of course.
Yeah. In terms of the sort of future outlook and like, I'm thinking about like what sort of advances may be coming with familial DNA. Like, I don't know if there's already some kind of artificial intelligence that's placed in there, or if there's, in the search, in the databases and that sort of thing. Can you talk about some of that?
Yes. So I think there are basically two ways to make I-FAMILIA better in the future. First of all, is to use the data that we already have plus additional data. And you talked about YSTR a bit before. Basically, to explain a bit what it is. So in the police around the world, everybody's using the same type of DNA for the investigation. That's what we call autosomal DNA. So that's the DNA that we all share, together. But you also can work with YSTR, which are the chromosome which only male, have. And so if you have a case where the DNA is in very bad shape, you can still use the YSTR and determine if a suspect is from a familial line. So it could be the person, it could be his dad, it could be his son, it could be his granddad, but you at least know that this person can belong to this, familial line. You can also use mitochondrial DNA. So that's another type of DNA which is pretty conserved in very old samples. And sometimes you can have, a hair in a case, and the hair most of the time don't contain a lot of nucleic DNA. So you can't really use the autosomal DNA, but you can use this specific DNA, which is only transmitted by the mother. So if you can find the mitochondrial DNA, you can determine if the person belongs to the same lineage as the mom, the grandmother, or the daughter, for example. So that's another way, like use different other kind of data, other DNA data that is not so available in the world, to increase the probability of identifying somebody based on the DNA evidence. The other way of doing that is definitely to use, as you say, algorithm, new artificial intelligence, new neuronal network, new ways to look at the data differently and be able to rearrange the data to create a model that could fit, all the possible outcomes of the matches that you're looking for. So I think a lot of work needs to be put in this to be able to make connections, between profiles. So the only thing is that you don't want to get too much into what DNA could give you. Because, for example, when I was working in the French forensic police, we started developing some methods, for example, what we call DNA phenotyping. So that's basically when you're trying to predict the appearance of someone from the DNA left at the crime scene. So that's very, very a good way to analyze DNA when you have a profile, but it doesn't match to anyone. So you don't know who the person is. And if you don't have any testimony or anything, you can predict a bit how the person is looking like. So the color of the eyes, color of the hair, maybe the ancestry sometimes, the color of the skin, if the person has freckles or baldness, or elements that could help a police officer to say, okay, this kind of person don't look like the person I'm looking for. So I will, put more energy into this group of people that look like the DNA I have. So it means that it's very difficult when you work on DNA not to get overwhelmed by everything that is possible. But sometimes, because of privacy and because of to respect what the thing that a person don't necessarily want to know about their DNA, we need to be extremely fixed on what we can use, what we can do. And that's what Interpol is doing. We're extremely aware about data privacy, and we only use the data when we really need to do it. So that's why the database is non-nominal, because this is not information that we want to have. And we don't give any information to the country when the other country don't want to share this data with them. That's what we call restrictions. So it means that every country is responsible and the owner of its own data and can decide to withdraw them anytime they want.
Right.
And that's how countries can, accept the role of Interpol and agree with our mandates, because they know that their data is their own, and we are only the bridge between the data.
Right. Oh, that's great. And I really like the example that you with phenotyping, because you're looking for a European male with dark hair, and I'm here in Canada, you're there in France, and guess what?
We both
fit the profile. So there you go. So but I guess it's a testament to the power of using Y-DNA, because now it's like, well, I need to find this person's relatives and that sort of thing. So I really like that. Look, I don't have really any more questions, but other than if somebody wants to reach out to you, I just want to post this here, and they can find you on LinkedIn. I also noticed that you did some talks. It looks like a TEDx that you did. When was that?
So that was in 2015 in France, in a city called Rennes. So it's in Brittany. And so I was invited to give a talk, and that was my first experience of giving a talk with so many people. There were probably 1,200 or something. So that was a bit scary. But what I did at this event was to present what the French police was doing with DNA phenotyping, and to illustrate that, what we did was I guess it's called Guess Who in America. So that's the game where you have people and you put them down each time you ask a question. And so we did that live. So we asked everybody to get up and say, okay, so the criminal is from European ancestry. So he has dark hair. He is between 47 and 52. And you could see all the people like sitting down until just a couple of people were still up. So just to show that it's a very efficient way to reduce the list of suspects, even if you have a very big large of suspects. So I'm trying to communicate in a way where people understand what the police is doing, maybe giving them like some concrete example of how the police forces, the French police, Interpol can help in their day-to-day life if they are confronted with a crime or one of their loved ones going missing, just so they know that there are multiple people in the world working for the police or helping the police to get them some information in the end.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, look, I want to say thank you very much. Really, really great information. I think what you guys are doing is really great. Some good stuff there. You never know, maybe some people will reach out to you. But
Sure.
Hey, thanks so much for joining me. Hang back here if you can, and I just want to chat with you a little bit later.
No problem.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. All right, folks. Well, that does it for this episode. Some really great information there and some great work done by Francois there. And yeah, hopefully we'll see the fruits of that and in helping people, missing people and that sort of thing. So don't forget, next week, Thursday, 2 p.m., we'll see you again. Take care and have a good day. Bye-bye.